in this accusation as hosting Al-Shabaab. The region has very unsecure borders. Somebody was asking me the infiltration of guns to villages and families, where are they coming from? The borders of most countries of the IGAD region is very porous. We have small arms proliferation that penetrates from the Turkana area all the way. You can go all the way up to Chad. You can smuggle gun. All the way from Libya, Chad, Central Africa, Sudan, South Sudan, up to northern part of Kenya, you can smuggle guns. From Ukraine, you can smuggle guns all the way and hence up in the coastline of the Indian Ocean and can come in. So the borders are very porous, and that's a problem. So if you're asking me where are the guns coming from, I mean, some people will be saying, yes, it's the police that give them, which we also found in our findings. Yeah, where am I? Okay. The borders, the presence of international community in the IGAD region, mostly in Djibouti today. We have camps for almost all the big names in the world today. We have American base in Djibouti. We have French in Djibouti. We have Turkey in Djibouti. We have Russia, China. We have, I don't know, almost all the big countries of the UN, the big five, they are all in Djibouti. And what is the size of Djibouti? Is the district of Kisumu and Mombasa and Likoni combined, I think. And what are they all doing there? And this group, Al-Shabaab, violent extremist group, they target the international community. So I want you to know that background. There is a lot of changes and introduction of ideology within the extremist group. Al-Shabaab has gotten more advanced because they have links with ISIS. So the ideology is changing, the ideology is getting more refined and targeting ways by which they can increase their recruitment, ways by which they can actually even fight to take over governments and rule using the Sharia law, like Boko Haram. So next. There are some gaps within our own institutions. This could be institutions within the districts, within the region, within the country, within the IGAD region, and also gaps in the international institutions like the UN, the African Union, and so forth. So what are those gaps? These are very key because these gaps are some of the issues that we defined as problems for our research that needs to be investigated, and then if there's some evidence we can bring, it can help us to fill in these gaps within our state institutions. What are the gaps? Critical need of training support to prevent and counter violent extremism for youth. There are so many scattered programs, some of them initiated by youth, some of them coined by governments, but they're all scattered. Some of them don't even exist. But above all, youth are not defined. They are not asked what kind of training do they need. So the institutions are there. We have Ministry of Youth, Gender and Development and all that, but they are all scattered in different places. Others don't target the youth based on their critical needs. So it's top down. Then we have civil society organizations, so many of them. That is why we said, well, we need civil society organizations to be part and parcel of these processes. And then we have police, judges who have worked with the police, who have worked with many also, and prosecutors who run you to court, prosecute you, and release you after 14, 15 years. This has happened in Uganda. People who were suspected of killing the Assistant Inspector General of Police, Tawesi, were found not guilty after 3 years. They had no hand in it. And they're released. When they're released, they cannot go back to their homes. Where do they go? They find extremist group. They have developed already ideas of joining the groups. And then, of course, I talked about the border monitoring, patrols, strengthening interdepartmental cooperation. There's so many strategies which is missing today. we don't have joint strategy of intervention, terrorism in the region. We have anti-terrorism strategy, but Kenya and Uganda, all the countries don't really use them together. Document forgery, combating arms trafficking, supporting violent extremism legislation, and strengthening democratic institutions, judicial systems. Here, I'm saying, okay, for example, an election is conducted, you know very well that your candidate won, even probably he won by 90%, but somebody manipulates the election and then the other person has defeated and cheating. So how do we strengthen our democratic institutions? Election Management Board is one of them. Police is one of them, as is democratic, and so forth. How do we make sure that the judicial system is up to date and actually they can rule cases on the basis of truth and proper findings without corruption, improving governance and so forth? There is lack of public support for counterterrorism strategy in the IGAD region. Why am I saying this? Literature tells us that each country in the IGAD region does not look at IGAD strategy as the main concern for them to contribute, even with money, to improve that. However, the national security of each country is a priority to that country. So national priority to Kenya is priority number one. IGAD comes that second last. So lack of support and public awareness, people don't take appropriate response easily. Sometimes something that happens in Kisumu or in Mombasa, when you say, okay, we are members of IGAD, and you tell this to Somali or to South Sudan or Sudan, in the spirit of intervening as a member of IGAD, let's go and help in Kisumu. They don't think that it is that problem is theirs. They don't think it is important for them, and yet we are talking of IGAD. Okay, next slide. I want to jump over some of the issues. The socio-political, socio-economic, political, and social and religious impact has been the wider concern for this region. Next. The inclusion of youth into national and regional formulation and implementation of policies, legislative framework, is missing. So it needs to be updated if it is there. We have national policy, we have what, but it's not really updated. And women and youth, female and male are very much important part of violent extremist programming. I think, as I was writing this slide, it's not just programming. Right now, it is about intervention. Because with both male and female, young ones are equally getting recruited. If anything, more female are getting recruited compared to male. And women are becoming more dangerous in executing extremist ideologies compared to men. So we have to take this very seriously. And I already mentioned about the legal information about youth engagement and inclusion into national and regional formulation. Next. So what is it about Kenya then? Kenya has so many underlying political, I mentioned that, social and economic problems that has to today expose the country to violence and violent extremism. The intervention of Kenya into Somalia in October 2012 has generated also a very clear signal. The bombing of the Westgate Mall was as a result of that. Next. Kenya has very many historical legacies of ethnic and religious discrimination, especially in areas of education, jobs, healthcare, clean water, electricity, serviceable roads and treatment by local police and justice officials. Other issues include historical discrimination of what we call, I've forgotten this, like the issue of the 10-mile strips around here. historical injustice. Thank you. Historical injustices you find everywhere in Garissa, in Sumo, in Mombasa. It's all kind of structural inequality, pitting the growing youth population with limited economic opportunity and combined with the effects of security. I've already mentioned about the economic, social, and disparities and intercommunal conflicts. The role of civil society. Civil society is growing, but there are different views about civil society, not only in Kenya, but also in Uganda and others. That's it. The counterterrorism effort of Kenya is there, and as I mentioned, the strategy exists. The question is, maybe Profina will talk about this, we have not been able to see the document, and yet we want the research to improve that strategy. Issues of ideology, identity, defending resources like land, grievances, and so forth exist in Kenya, and that has also forced youth to join violent extremist groups. There is now, in certain areas, a very clear disconnect between the state and the citizen, where the social contract between the state has broken down. In certain areas, police and the youth are two different entities who are best enemies of each other first, and has an opportunity to get rid of will take place. If the police sees the other one first, then they have to shoot. If the youth see the police, for example in Matare, in Babadogo, in certain areas, they hate the police to the core. That our best enemy is police. So now you begin to understand why. Why should there be problem between youth and the government? In fact, it should be the other way around. So today, there are many varying levels of conflict. Also, violent extremism has been cited that it could start from an individual, just an individual, goes to family, goes to a community, an institution that is surrounding that particular individual, or the church, the school you go to, friends, then you go to a community, then you go to the entire maybe district, then maybe the entire bigger institution. Being attributed in literature, they are attributed to lack of governance. Those groups that fight to establish constitutional framework of governance usually use certain phrases which are different from hit and run attacks. For example, the Loss Resistance Army in Kenya, in Uganda, they are fighting to establish a governance structure, lead the country using 10 commandments of God, which is written in the Bible. Anybody who operates outside that is an infidel, should be killed. Let me jump that one. There are issues whether conflict generates violent extremism or the other way around. We haven't found that. So for those who want to do more research, you might need to ask a question whether conflict generates violent extremism or violent extremism generates conflict. Youth have started developing an idea, a way of life for them, the behavior, how they should behave in society, how they should talk. In certain areas we found how they talk Sheng, the Swahili, is it Sheng? Or is it Sheng? Yeah, and then also the way of behaving when they are walking, they, swag, right? Yeah. So there's a way of life that youth have started doing it, right? And somehow it could surprise some of us, but this is what is going on now. Youth have started developing their way of life, and they think that anything outside that is unjust. So we don't understand youth, they don't understand us. It is we and us and they. So it's the polarization between youth and the institutions of governance and the population who seem to think life should be different is widening. So we need to do that. We need to see to it that, yes, literature has been telling us it is happening. Youth have direct links in literature. When you talk about youth and you put in conflict, you put in the issues of development, violent extremism, we have links in literature. And there's big literature that talks about all this. And the discourses can go into bad governance, can go into leadership, youth bad. There are literatures that look at youth in terms of development as the promised generation. There are also literature that looks at youth as violent as the tiger generation. They can jump on your neck and bite you anytime. They're already hungry, so they can do anything. So there are literatures on that. Anybody who wants to read that, I can recommend certain literatures for you. Youth are leaving rural areas. They don't want to do agriculture, farming, and all sorts of things. They don't want to do piggery and looking after cows. They want to come to rural cities. It doesn't matter whether you're educated or not. In those days, probably you come to cities because you're looking for a better institution where you can get your degrees and then get employed within the city, have a white-collar job, and drive your V8, and have a flash phone, and run around with Adidas and be admired. The youth want to do the same, but they don't want to do farming. They want a quick one. They want to develop an application on iPhone that can inform the farmers how to water your cabbages, and then the next day you are like Steve Jobs, earning millions, right? So we have to understand youth, because this is what is going on. Passivity, violent extremist group are now should be understood in two dimensions. There are those who are very passive, there are those who are very active. Now, research has not yet shown us clearly who are these passive violent extremist group, how do they behave, how do we understand who they are. Passive means of surprise from nowhere. Professor Okelo has exploded himself in a mall, and he has left a note and said this, Allahu Akbar, and all that thing, and what people say. Or a political leader has been shot dead, and this is what they found in his house. He was a radical. Yeah. Or a bishop, a Catholic bishop has done this, and he is a radical. And he has done that, and he has done that. Suddenly, people begin to understand, say, what? It's unbelievable. In Europe, they call them homegrown. He's neither a religious person, nor he just hates blacks. He's a racist. And it has gone into his mind, radicalized himself to the extent that he managed to get guns and clear people. So let us begin to think about who is passive, who is active. Systematic research on gender. When does radicalization start taking place? As I said, if you look at the different levels, individual levels, family levels, institutions, and so forth. Radicalization in some of our research, we found that starts taking place from children as young as 4 years old. 4, 5, 6, by the time they go to secondary school, 7, 8, they're more or less already begin to think differently. And it is very difficult to find ways of either identifying whether those individuals are actually passive, already into the radicalization, ready to die, or they can still be recovered in certain ways. And then the role of gender, we can say it can be a breaker or a driver of violence. We have to take that note. Female suicide terrorists have also been cited several times, but we should also remember that there are so many women who join the military, the police, the prison, and they work very well. So we should not begin to say, yes, women who join our military activities are extremely passive and dangerous. No. So we need to make that distinction. However, more passivity of violent extremism lies with women, and probably these guys who have gone through a lot of education. Women entries in armed military confrontations, they vary. In Uganda has been cited, Sudan has been cited, Somali women are active in armed opposition groups and in militia and paramilitary forces. While voluntary entry tend to suggest that women of such nature who support ideological armed struggle, like in the case of Ethiopia and Eritrea, majority of those women are forcefully conscripted and to conduct, to be part of it. You're fighting to defend your country. In Libya was the same thing. The Kadogos of Uganda were mainly young girls. And then those who were conscripted forcefully by being arrested and abducted to be women, wives of commanders of the Lord's Resistance Army were younger. They were forced. They come and round up, and suddenly you find yourself in the bush with radical groups. I think I don't need to go too far. People are getting tired. Okay, motivation. What motivates people? Literature says clearly the drivers and enablers of violent extremism are very many. So many, they're increasing by the day. They're also getting very much complex. They're getting so complicated. It's not a simple way of coming to your house and say, can you please give me your son so that we go and train him to explode? It's getting different. It's also very context specific. Tofina will talk more about that. There are religious background to that. There are ideological background to that. There are political background to that. There are economic background to that. And there are historical dimensions to all that. It is extremely wrong to say that the only driver of the drivers of violent motivation of violent extremism is religious. In fact, we are finding that it is not playing a bigger role anymore. But many people believe religion. If you are in Islam or the Muslim, you are definitely easy to recruit. It is not true. And I think Tofina will also talk about how they describe people who can easily be recruited. Those who have so it's not true. So we have to look at that. And then there are many researchers who have found that drivers of violent extremism, they show that lack of authority in a certain area or in governance. There is no data. We need more data. And the complexity is ahead of these interventions. Let me look at process. Violent extremism does not emerge in one day. You wake up and you get crazy and then you explode yourself. It goes through a process. And their motivations could be money, could be grievance, could be anything that enables you to operate the way you do, whether you are an individual, as an institution, family, or so forth. If somebody has been wrongfully put in prison and released, he will not come back as a normal person. He has also stories to tell to others. Okay, let me see. Let's go down here. The push factors. Literature tells us that there are so many push factors. Factors that push youth to join. You are pushed to do it. And there are structural conditions. Most of them, underdevelopment. And when we talk about underdevelopment, immediately UNDP says, employ them. If you're underdeveloped, you're poor, enrich them, give them loans. I think my colleague Tofina will talk about that. Unemployment, political repression. Go deal with the youth the way they are, push them in the street, let them defend your political ideology, let them take the tear gas, but for us we will be safe. But those youth are willing to die because they have nothing. So they can be politically repressed. And social marginalization that can fuel grievances and so forth. Then, let's go. The push factors. We looked at. We then talk about the push. Come, we will help you. You will be part of us. Come, we identify ourselves with you. This starts also from the level of the individuals all the way. All the family members may not know that an individual youth is being pulled slowly into an activity which is subversive. And this can be when you victimize. One of the youth told me, but Dad, if you keep telling me every day, I'm a thief, I'm a bad boy, I'm this, every day I'm beaten, every day of my life, what do you expect me to develop in my mind at the end of the day? Will I even be proud that you are my dad? I will have to believe that, yes, I'm a thief, and I will identify myself with those who are also. So whose problem is that? So they get pulled into this. Wrongful prosecution, looking at youth as bad people, violent, enemies of this society, and also bereavement in the family if one person has been killed wrongfully, for example. A member of the family may be something related to this. What is it which is connected? There is very thin line because some of these gangs for hire are ready to join also violent extremist group, either to do a contract of transportation of arms, and then that's where it ends, or to carry out an assassination or anything subversive, but they are not necessarily belonging to a violent extremist group. They have organized gang groups. Our research is looking at the violent extremist group. So you would be asking us, how do we make that distinction? It is very difficult in this research, especially when you are looking at passive group. Women carrying pistols inside their bra, ready to go and do an activity, or a knife at the back pocket, because you cannot certainly see the reunification of the boy and the family after 5 years. Religious ideologies is one of the pull factors I've mentioned. Recruitment of youth in the name of religion is there. Not only, I emphasize again, in the Muslim or Islam community, but also in others. Economic factors are there, which creates unemployment and poverty and so forth. And gender-based motivation and drivers have been one of those most important in this research. And there's a big literature that says that female who are involved are either portrayed as pawns or victims or agents, and others are represented in the media as deviant women, monsters or victims to be rescued. So there's not much research that has gone into how women get motivated. What strategies do we have today? In terms of the global strategy, we talked about the UN, so forth. And then can you go to the strategies yet? Go. Yes. Yeah. The UN global strategy, counterterrorism strategy is there, and from that there is a UN plan of action, which every country is emulating. Then we have, I think, the remark was also citing that. The member states also decided to give further considerations to plan at the global to the plan of action that the UN has generated. And then we have continental, the AU 2002 protocol on anti-terrorism is there. UK counter-terrorism strategy of 2011 is also being developed. Many countries are copying that. And then the European Union counter-terrorism strategy of 2005 also is there. Many people are borrowing leaves from that. Now we have the IGAD, which is trying to develop. IGAD Impact Center is trying to develop some strategies. COMESA is also trying to develop some strategy, but they use economic empowerment together with UNDP mostly, which is a liberal approach, saying that if you give a youth money, opportunities, fat bank account, he can be able to pay his rent, he can be able to marry, he can be able to buy land. There's very little chance for him to join or her to join violent extremist group. Punitive approach I've already talked about, heavy-handed. There's a new way of rethinking new strategy. Maybe this is where we will contribute a lot. We need to rethink our strategy. Bottom up and top down, all together. And where do they meet? There is, we should include the youth. Yeah, counterbalance strategy I've mentioned also, that locally based grassroots strategy. Here, what we're saying here is that the organizations that are at the grassroots and civil society should emphasize, as the studies have been doing, more on grassroots initiatives. And let's be aware that civil society are sometimes perceived as a risk or a threat to government, national security. Again, the grassroots knowledge should not be underrated. The knowledge of the community at the local social level is what generates what we call social identification. Is very easy. Social interaction is very easy. And group processes is very easy to detect. Relative deprivation is very easy. If we have this knowledge, we can also look at the political life of that society, the economic life of that society, the cultural life of that society, and the religious characteristics of how they behave when they go to church, when they go to mosque, who comes to the mosque today, who did not come, who died, where we're going for marriage, we're going for funeral, they know that. This is where things can be. What do we have today, before I end, sorry for keeping you waiting, there is a regional plan of action in the prevention and countering of violent extremism in general, which is what we have today. Regional, by regional I mean the IGAD. And the AU is also working with this. It is part and parcel of the global plan, UN Global Plan of Action. It has 7 priorities that if we do this, we will be able to prevent and counter violent extremism. Not only among youth, but those who join. Therefore, one of the areas is let us have a very well developed dialogue and conflict prevention mechanism. We haven't confirmed in our research on this inclusive mechanism whether we should say yes, it is dialogue and conflict prevention, but we are hearing a lot coming also from the opening speech that conflict prevention is necessary, but how do you involve youth? Is it through dialogue? You cannot come for conflict prevention when you're targeting youth to be shot at, imprisoned, or sidelined and say, yeah, no, they are not necessary, and you call that conflict prevention. It must come with dialogue. So maybe there's time now to have some dialogue with youth. Strengthening good governance, human rights, and the rule of law, that is one pillar. Such wants to engage with the communities. Empowering the youth, this is where we are. Gender equality and empowering women, this is where we are. I would probably say women and men. There are some women who seriously can beat their husbands. They can really discipline their husband. There are so many, and it is growing. Is there any organization that empowers men who go through domestic violence?
Yes.
Yes. So there are some men who even join and they run away, they go and start drinking because going home, there's danger there. There's danger. You go home late today, you are in trouble. So, then, okay, that's education, skills development, and employment facilities. Youth also fall here. Strategic communication, the internet, and the social media. Youth also fall here. When we say the civil society approach, it is crucial. But when we say holistic counter-violent extremism, we should advocate for some form of alternative opportunities. Alternative opportunity. We are talking of what we already know today. But what is different? Is it empowerment of the positive role models? When somebody who comes back from Sabah camp reports back or comes back and say, I have run away, please protect me. I want to talk to people. I know how I was lured into this system. I want to be a role model and talk to these people, not to join. I want to be a role model. How do we protect such a person? How do we provide opportunities so that that person can have an impact on preventing youth who are thinking of going? Engage, marginalized group, and so forth. We need to put all that recruitment, radicalization, and so forth, we need to put them, most of all, bottom up and top down together, maybe from inside, middle, inside out as well. So I think that is all I can say. The model should include everyone, inclusive. Government officials, the way we have done it. Civil society organizations, the way we have conducted it. Religious leaders, elders, youth, and so forth. So with that, I think I have to stop here and apologize for boring you. And I wish you all the best. If there will be questions. If you have any question, please write it down. We have a session for questions and answers. And I hope the answers will also come from some of you.
Allow us to go marathon because we requested that we would like people for us to have a half-day workshop. If we were having a full day, then we would break even at this moment and maybe stretch and then come back. So allow us to put all this together. Then after that, we will unpack it with your questions. I hope this is okay with you. Is it? Yes. I believe Prof has already talked about the background to this study. Going back to it will be will be repeating things that have already been done, and it will make it boring. But most importantly, globally and even in the African region, and now specifically in the IGAD region, and when we come back to Kenya, and even break Kenya from the national level to the county level, there's so much focus on youth activities. Earlier on, youth had been neglected, had been left behind. There was so much focus on children and women, or the girl child. They were not specifically talking about youth. But now, from the global level up to our grassroots level, there's so much focus on youth. And in fact, right now we are just the last year of the youth decade by the African Union. In as much as that is the case, very little is known about the youth. What is known about the youth, from what the youth have told us, is things that people have said about them, not what the youth know about themselves. That's why we say very little is known about the youth. The youth have been stereotyped. They have been looked at as a lost generation. They have been looked at as tigers. They have been looked at people who just want things so fast. And therefore, that has made the youth withdraw, or most of the youth withdraw. Those who are active and engaged in activities like those whom I'm seeing here are a very small percentage, maybe a third of the total. It is important to also know that when we are talking about violent extremism, not all the youth are involved in violent extremism. Also, not all the youth are involved in the negative part of the violent extremism. There are those youth who are positive, who are doing good things, like the ones who are here and belong to groups, peace ambassadors, for example, who work with fellow youth to work with the women and youth to correct others, to encourage others to do positive things in the society. We have a very limited participative ability of the youth in activities that concern them. And because of this, youth have felt excluded. That's why we are talking about youth inclusive mechanisms. How can we include them? How can we make sure that both boys and girls, men and women are included, male and female are included, and they feel accepted and engaged? There are various issues that we looked at before developing this proposal. And one of them is that violent extremism and radicalization is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon. It is difficult to even understand it, because when we get to know who is involved and how they have masterminded and gone about this thing, everybody is usually left bewildered. When young men make up the majority of the combatants and perpetrators of violence in most contexts, the majority do not perpetrate violence. Majority of them do not. But whenever we talk about it, especially the older generation, we lump all youth together and say, youth are like this, we stereotype them. And that angers the youth. There is also a dearth of information, or it's not clear, the gender disaggregated data about the daily lives of the youth. What does a youth do from morning to evening? Nowadays we say, all they do is to stick on their phones, make calls from morning till evening. People don't know how they make decisions to do whatever they do. Nobody asks them what they are doing with themselves, but we just stereotype and say, we have made up our mind, this one only sticks on the phone.Maybe on that phone they are working. Maybe they are working as they are concentrating on that phone, you never know. So that kind of data needs to be captured. Their experiences, especially those who have been involved or have lost their friends to, in this country we talk about Al-Shabaab, those who have lost their friends to the Al-Shabaab groups, or their family members have been recruited or radicalized. Those experiences have not been captured. We also needed to look at a more holistic approach of preventing and countering violent extremism, because all we know is what the government has been doing, and this has been the hard approaches, whereby shoot to kill order, and such, imprison them, and that kind of handling the issue of preventing and countering violent extremism. Do we have soft approaches other than the hard approaches that have been there before? We have already, Prof has mentioned the top-down, bottom-up approach. Most of the researches that we have been looking at have been looking at the national level. But our approach in this research is the individual, the household, the micro level. And then we merge the two, the macro level studies that have been done with what we are doing at the grassroots level. It is the reason why we are here. We have come back to the people who gave us that information, to the communities that we shared our idea with, and we have come back to you so that you validate our findings. Then, in this research, we are also doing comparative studies. We went to informal settlements in Nairobi, the areas, and then we collected data, because those are the areas where we have seen violent extremism at the highest level. Then we are here also in Mombasa, and specific areas in Mombasa we were advised where to go, the hotspot areas. And then we also went to Garissa. I think it's for obvious reasons. If you are a Kenyan, you know why those particular areas, isn't it? Yes. So we want to look at the comparison between what has happened in Nairobi, Garissa, and Mombasa. Then another thing that Prof already mentioned, the issue of the drivers of violent extremism has been overgeneralized. Many times people just say it's because of unemployment or poverty, or people who have a phobia against Islam say it's because of Islamic religion, and they have made that to be the real issue and pushed that forward. But for us in our study, we came up with an open mind. We want a holistic understanding of this idea. There is a tendency of looking at a problem-solving approach to issues, whereby, okay, Mombasa, we are finding their drugs there, so we just go and hold all of them and put them in the cells, or they are shot. because these ones, when they are involved in that, then it is leading to this. That is a problem-solving approach. Ours is to understand people, have dialogue. When we have dialogue, instead of just thinking that this cause and effect kind of relationship, we will go into understanding that there are certain good practices, like what I'm saying. Youth who are here today have talked to us when we were in the field, and the good things that they are doing. Can that be amplified so that others can also learn from that? And then those who are doing bad things can also refrain from doing those negative activities. We cannot ignore the issue of youth unemployment in our country, just like what it is globally. Youth unemployment has been a big issue, but for us in this particular study, we have gone to the depths of understanding it better so that we can see, is it a blanket issue that yes, it's youth unemployment that is causing violent extremism, or there are other factors linked to youth unemployment. So the extent to which the policy environment in the country and the policies that have been put in place for the youth, to support youth or to prevent violent extremism also have to be interrogated in place. I think from my explanation of where we found the gaps, you have already understood the purpose of our study. Ours is a holistic approach to understanding violent extremism. Not just coming, we came to the field with an open mind. We did not say, okay, Mombasa, this is the problem. We came with an open mind, and we were, in fact, challenged with some of our ideas that we had. Bottom line is to investigate the mechanisms of preventing and countering violence. There are 4 objectives that we have. We want to analyze the drivers of violent extremism. When we're looking at the drivers of violent extremism, we were looking at both the